I'm Kenton McHenry, Associate Director for Software at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications and Tech Lead for the EarthCube Eco Office. What I'm going to present today is our effort this year during our annual meeting, to have a call for notebooks as a way of capturing and exposing some of the software being developed there. First, let me give you a little bit of background about EarthCube. EarthCube is an NSF program that started roughly around 2012 with the goal to advance cyber infrastructure in support of geoscience research. This is a field that's been growing in terms of its need around data and software for some time now. And so the idea was to basically build out more of the tools that would be needed for this. And so this includes general infrastructure, data resources, analytical tools, standards around data and formats, things like that. And so a number of things have been developed, not just within EarthCube, but related areas that could potentially be used by geoscience. And so the idea is to make those things available and tuned for the geoscience community. To date, since that time, roughly 80 different efforts have been funded out of the EarthCube office. And again, there have been many related activities that could be leveraged by the EarthCube community as well. And so we don't distinguish between those. The idea is to support geoscience overall. And so we'll leverage those things as well and try to increase exposure for them. And so, again, as I mentioned, with regards to these tools, a lot of them focus on things like data sharing, interface standards, data wrangling, cleaning data, things like that, workflows, reproducibility is another big one. It's a key part of science. If you can't reproduce your results, it's not really science. So when that requires software and data, you need tools for those kinds of things. So as mentioned, one of the key aspects of this is exposure of these tools and basically increasing outreach so that people are aware that they even exist. Far too often, there's a lack of this awareness, and there's this kind of duplication of effort that tends to happen on occasions where multiple folks are developing the same kind of tool because they don't know the other one exists. And other aspects that because of that, there's limited interoperability between tools where they could potentially be chained together to do bigger things potentially. And there's another aspect of this as well in terms of sustainability that's actually really critical. Too often, these efforts are funded, and when the project funding ends, the software or the tool ends as well. And so the idea is to kind of make sure that these things are packaged in a way so that they're readily reusable. Potentially there's some sort of plan, an open source community around that could keep it going. But that's not always the case. And so there's these tools have various levels of readiness, various amounts of documentation, various aspects of reusability that makes everything a little more challenging. A number of efforts have attempted to, catalog these tools and increase their exposure. There's been an effort to basically create an inventory of EarthCube funded efforts. This is this tools inventory shown on the left here. There's been this larger effort, the resource registry for EarthCube, where these tools and other resources are basically cataloged there. It's a very manual effort in terms of getting that information in there, though, and that's a limiting factor. For some time now, there's also been this idea of creating a sort of workbench, a means of preserving these tools in a manner that was executable. So that folks can try them out and actually use the tools from within possibly a web interface. And so this is one example that was done by the National Data Service a few years back as a prototype. Basically, each of the tools was Dockerized and deployed with Kubernetes in the background to kind of deploy them and scale them out as needed when people use those. This was only a prototype, and it did require a significant amount of effort, engaging each team, working with them to find out what was usable. Sometimes it was around beyond the scope of what was initially conceived by each project in terms of thinking these in terms of reusable things or services and so forth. So a lot of effort was required to get each tool into there. And so that was a challenge as well. So as mentioned, there are a number of challenges. And so with regards to tracking these products, tools, services, and so forth, ideally, these would be voluntary efforts. And so the community would come together to increase the exposure of their own tools. That's not the case typically, though. And so a lot of the work, again, falls onto the office or some sort of coordinating body in order to do these kinds of things. Packaging of these tools, finding the reusable components as mentioned, and documentations, all things that are required for reusability, for sustainability, and things like that. And so in the ideal case, this is done by the community, but at the moment, this is done largely by the office. And so from here is where the idea for a call on notebooks are kind of originated. This idea of the office can't really do this, at least, especially in long term. The office won't always be there, for example. We need community involvement to bring these things together, period, long term. And so the idea was, could we do this in such a way that we could incentivize the scientific community to do these kind of things? And so the idea was to really leverage this idea of software as becoming a scholarly object, something that's basically essential to be preserved as well as a paper, with regards to reproducibility again, software being a key part, data being a key part of science today. And so decentralizing the creation of these artifacts in a manner so that others can then look at basically reuse some of the software as well as documentation around it. And so this wide adoption of notebooks and advancement of notebooks these days were a big part of the idea here, is leveraging that activity and that interest in these things to kind of capture these software tools. Now, the key aspect was incentivizing. And so a colleague of mine some time ago, Clara Narstead, mentioned this idea of peer review being a key part of many of the things that we in science do. These kind of elevates the things that we do in terms of something that could go in your CV, for example. And so that's where this idea came together, is what if we did this in such a way so that it was something that could go in your CV, a call for notebooks. And so we gave it a shot. It was a bit of an experiment to see if there would be interest from the community to do this. But we were willing to try, in the sense that if it worked, this would be a great way long-term to capture these scientific artifacts, document them, and allow others to not just find them, but actually use them. So this is the organizing committee for our call for notebooks. Myself, Dave Folker from OpenDAP, Lynn Schreiber from the EarthCube office, and Dan Katz from the University of Illinois and NCSA, and also one of the founders of JOS. We really leveraged his experience with the Journal of Open Source Software as part of that. He kind of really helped us and guided us for this endeavor. And so this is basically the call of notebooks. We posted on our webpage. We allowed for basically any type of notebook, Jupyter, RStudio, you name it, MATLAB, I suppose. We didn't really put any restrictions at this stage. We were just kind of trying to see if this could even get people's attention and people would submit something. And the basic key was submitting things that were relevant to geoscience in some way or another, ideally highlighting some software or tool. We were excited right away to see some buzz on Twitter from a number of folks around this. One thing we hadn't considered is the original due date before the pandemic hit was on April 1st. And so a number of, there was a question, at least, was this an April Fool's joke? And so, no, it wasn't. But so that early interest was inspiring in the sense that maybe we're doing something right here. So with regards to submissions, all we asked for was folks to submit a link to their notebook, a URL. This was convenient in the sense for us, since we could then reuse and leverage our past system that we've used, the Conf tool, for past meetings to submit posters and papers. We just add this extra field so we can folks could submit a link to their notebook. So that was convenient for this first round. Again, we left it open-ended in terms of the types of notebooks to submit. We just wanted to be open in terms of allowing folks to use what's easiest to them. We would figure out how to deal with it later on. This is, again, was an experiment. We were pleased to see that there were a good number of submissions, especially for this first round. We received 21 submissions overall, spanning geoscience and cyber infrastructure. And we were pleased to see that we had submissions not just from within the EarthCube community, but outside it as well, kind of just being relevant to geoscience, period. So that was good to see. One thing I'll point out, though, is that out of the 21 submissions, all of them were Jupyter. So that was an interesting factor, especially for when we do this again. We might actually just go ahead and make that the requirement going forward, especially with regards to how it might facilitate reviewing. So with regards to reviewers, here are the reviewers on the right, and we had a span of folks from the science community as well as the cyber infrastructure community. I think that's critical for these types of things, the technical side as well as the science side, making sure these are relevant to geoscience. We worked so that every submission had 2 to 3 reviews per notebook, so we really appreciate the reviewers doing this and making the time for this. So at the end of the day, after all the reviews were submitted, the organizers basically discussed the notebooks and the reviews, and we made our final decisions. We ended up deciding to accept 12 of them based on overall impact to geoscience research and usability, the ability to actually use the tool from the notebook. And we chose 5 of those to be highlighted in the session as oral presentations. And these were decided upon based on the reviews and the comments, but as well as diversity in our decisions. So with regards to presentations, this is kind of interesting because this is a little bit new, right? So in the sense that these are executable tools, they have documentation with them. It's a little bit different from your typical oral presentation where you have slides and so forth. Since this was new and a bit of an experiment, we deliberately left it open-ended to see what the authors would do, what they preferred to do, and so forth, and learn from that, basically. And so you can go to this link down here to see the actual presentations. And they, of course, spanned a number of different things. Many of them had PowerPoint to some degree, slides. A few of them actually walked through the notebooks, showing them on their screen and walking us through each of the parts. And at least one basically tried to merge the two. So showing having a PowerPoint slide with a piece of the notebook on the side and some visualizations on the other side. So a variety of different things that's expected. I would expect that in the future, more tools will be developed around enabling these kinds of things, highlighting the tools and their execution, as well as presentation of the overall ideas. One thing I will mention, though, is with regards to some of the computation requirements for these things and the data requirements, it was not really possible for some of the folks to actually execute their notebooks. It took too long or didn't have the resources to do it in the time frame that we had. So that's an aspect of this as well. So with regards to publication, we looked at a number of options. So at the very least, what we did is we set up this GitHub repository, which would serve as our virtual proceedings, where we captured each of the notebooks there. And that's the URL for it if you want to take a look at that. With regards to publication, archival, and the generation of a DOI, so folks can cite it, we had a number of options. One obvious one was to leverage Zenodo to mint the DOI for that. Another option we considered was working with Dan Katz and Joss to leverage some of their software with regards to that, possibly standing something up on behalf of EarthCube. One would have to consider that with that, though, longevity, what happens after EarthCube program moves on, what happens to that that archive, basically. And another aspect we considered was working with a recognized publisher like AGU. And so at the end of the day, what we did was we ended up going with that option, working with AGU to publish these things, largely around the archival aspect of it, and basically a recognized publisher being involved in this. So the notebooks were put into their eSource system for the moment. The AGU folks enabled the capability to add a notebook as a supplemental file to the system. And so we leveraged that. It is a maturing system at the moment, so that it sounds like the idea is to support this more thoroughly in the future. For the moment, we basically leverage their poster submission system with the addition of these notebooks being added to there. We highlight an abstract and a link to the GitHub repository and include the notebook as well, and they basically generate the DOI. And so this is the final published artifact that folks can then cite when leveraging a notebook, using a notebook, and so forth. So from this first call of notebooks, we learned quite a few things, a few insights that we'll use when we do this again. One of those was runnability, the ability to execute the notebooks. And so in some of the cases of the submissions, this was not so easy, and this made it hard to review the notebook. And so going forward, one of the things we'll probably do is require something like Binder, perhaps, so that the entire environment is encapsulated and it's easier to run the notebook. Sounds like Jupyter Book is something to look at as well, and so we'll be doing that in terms of being more like a paper with regards to citations and things like that. And so we'll be considering that as one way as well. Another thing we didn't do for this first call was have any formatting guidelines. In this, you can see this when you look at the submissions, they do vary a bit in terms of that. And so going forward, to kind of have that similar look and feel of normal proceedings, we'll have some sort of formatting guidelines in terms of, how the title, authors, abstract, sections, citations kind of look. One of the things we did observe as well was there were two distinct types of notebooks submitted. One, as the call kind of really emphasized, was around tools. For geoscience, and another was really much more on the science side of things, asking various scientific questions and just so happening to use some tool. And so one of the caveats here was on occasion the same tool will be used for different scientific questions, and so how do you deal with that? The idea is probably these should be two separate tracks going forward. There's one very focused on the science side of things and different scientific questions. One's very much focused on the tools side of thing in terms of what it enables, its innovation in itself, and so forth. And a student track as well was also something that was brought up. We should include that and encourage students to be submitting these different kinds of publications that include software as well. Another interesting side of things was in terms of identifying reviewers. We needed reviewers who were not only versed in geoscience, but cyber infrastructure as well. And so this could be challenging on occasion. As all of us, we have various levels of knowledge with regards to both aspects of that. So that makes it tricky. I'm hoping that by having these two tracks, one on the science and tool side of things, that might help identifying reviewers. And lastly, with regards to publication, again, this is an evolving kind of thing. And so in the future, I think we're going to consider what we could do here in terms of truly highlighting the executable part of these artifacts, these notebooks. And so what kind of system we can deploy that not only addresses the archival aspects, the citation, DOI aspects, but really enables the execution of these tools. Ideally, even when it requires large amounts of data analytics or computation time, some way of really highlighting the execution and use of those tools. And so that concludes my presentation. And again, we're hoping to do this call for notebooks again next year, and ideally in other venues as well. Thanks.